So I would like to welcome all of you to the Responsible Artificial Intelligence Network Workshop, RAIN Workshop. My name is Professor Jerry John Ponyo from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, one of the co-founders of this network. The Responsible Artificial Intelligence Network is actually a network of like-minded people who are focused on ensuring that artificial intelligence is used responsibly. We started as a collaboration between the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology and the Technical University of Munich, specifically the Institute of Ethics in Artificial Intelligence. Starting with 2 institutions, now there are more than 13 institutions making up the network. The practice is to gather around the table and deliberate on key issues as it relates to artificial intelligence. For some time now, there has been a lot of conversation and a lot of debate as far as generative AI is concerned. Today, I am excited. We have assembled the best of the best as far as the topic is concerned. We want to reflect on generative AI, opportunities, and responsible use. I've had the chance of interacting with the key people who will be speaking to us, and I'm confident that this session will be one that we will keep with us for a very long time. To moderate the session for us, we have Dr. Caitlin Corrigan. Caitlin is a co-founder of the Responsible Artificial Intelligence Network, and she is with the Technical University of Munich, actually the executive director for the Institute of Ethics in Artificial Intelligence. I've worked closely with Caitlin for a very long time, and I am confident with reference to the experience that she brings to bear as far as the topic is concerned. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Caitlin to take over the moderation of the meeting. Over to you, Caitlin.
Thank you so much, Jerry. Thank you all for being here, and to our panelists, thank you so much for taking your time. I'm going to switch off the share so that we can all see each other and share our slides and such for our panelists. So this is one of, I would say, the biggest topics we've come across this year. The amount of interest in AI ethics has slowly gained pace, I would say, since our institute started in 2019. We, at that point, were one of the first institutes of our kind. Even though it sounds pretty young, we were really the only one we could find for that period of time. And now it has just taken off in terms of research, in terms of university interest, but also in terms of corporate and public interest. And since the advent of ChatGPT, it has only exponentially grown. The amount of people from the public, people from news, people from companies, people from policy who are interested in just knowing more about this topic, what it means for them, what it means for legislation, what it means for ethics and responsible use has taken off. So I'm really happy we have this group gathered here today to talk about this in the African context as well. I'm going to jump right into our speakers so that we have plenty of time for questions at the end, and we invite you all to please keep your cameras and microphones off during the presentations, but when we get to the end, please use the chat function or raise your hand and we can unmute you to discuss this topic more with our panelists. So I first want to introduce Renee Cummings, who's joining us today from in the early morning in the US. Thank you so much. She joined the School of Data Science in 2020 as the school's first data activist in residence. She's a criminologist, criminal psychologist, artificial intelligence ethicist, therapeutic jurisprudence specialist, and urban technologist. Her areas of research interests include artificial intelligence, political science, and criminology. She studies the impact of AI on criminal justice, specifically in communities of color and incarcerated populations. Renee specializes in implicit bias, AI ethics, and best practice criminal justice. She holds an MS in Rehabilitation Science and Substance Abuse Counseling from the Hunter College, and an MA in Criminal Justice from John Jay College, and a master's certificate in terrorism studies. Renee designs her own bachelor's degree at Hunter College in political science philosophy, media studies, and creative writing. She's also community scholar in artificial intelligence and criminal justice at Columbia University. Thank you so much for joining us, Renee. We'll start off with your presentation and follow up with our other panelists.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that introduction. And let me say it is an absolute pleasure to be doing this webinar and to be in the presence of African royalty when it comes to artificial intelligence. So Darlington, Lavina, and of course, Caitlin and John, thank you so much for including me in this conversation. So let me try to share this screen. Hold on right here. 1 second. Tell me if it's, are you seeing that? If it's there?
It is there.
Okay. Fantastic.
Not in the full slide, though. Yeah.
Let me put it into full. Alrighty. What's going on here? Have I not? Just 1 second, please. Let me just get this into. Not sure what's happening here, why it's not getting into full, but we will get that now, probably. Let's do that. Alrighty, we're there. So let me just say one thing is that generative AI, and if you wanted a quick definition, it's just artificial intelligence with the ability to generate text, images, video, and other forms of media. But within the last, I would say 4 or 5 months, generative AI has certainly exploded. I will just give you a little backstory. In January, I was invited by the CEO of OpenAI to Washington, D.C., where OpenAI invited about 20 policymakers in and around the Virginia and D.C. area. I'm also a professor of data science at the University of Virginia School of Data Science. And when we had that conversation, Sam Altman pretty much just showed us, ChatGPT-4 and what they were expecting to do with it. And by June, I was absolutely blown away when I realized the impact this technology was having on society and our future. So I'm just going to do a quick take on the risks, the rewards, the responsibilities, and the rights. So the big question is this: how do we harness the power of generative AI, reaping the rewards, reducing the risk? And it's the question we've been asking about AI for quite some time. So it's this technology, generative AI, and most of us have interacted with this technology using ChatGPT, and we've seen how helpful this technology can be when we think about the ways in which we create, the ways in which we can innovate, doing the tasks that we may not like writing or putting together our programs or putting together projects. And we've seen how this technology is really world transforming. Large language models, the impact of large language models, generative AI, ChatGPT. But then there have also been questions around the harms of this technology. So we know this technology has the ability to transform just everything about the way we interact, the way we innovate, and the way we design, and the way we think. But we also know while we can use this technology to solve some of those major challenges that we've experienced as a society and as humanity, we also know that this technology is generating new ethical concerns, new harms, and those harms originate from the historical data set. So large language models, generative AI, ChatGPT, how are they built? They are built by scraping the internet of all that information that's been there, all that information that we have historically generated. But we've realized with our interaction with artificial intelligence, and of course through data science, that baked into many of our data sets and baked into these large language models are these historical data harms that have the ability to automate the status quo, bolster discrimination, codify bias. These things can be deeply destructive, as we have seen with questions around bias and discrimination and fairness. And of course, the ability to repeat some of those past prejudices and pains and the trauma for many communities, because one of the things that I've always said is that different communities have historically experienced data differently. Now, this is something that I just want you to think about. And this concept, when we think about data, when we think about the data that's being used to build these large language models, this concept of the pale male bias, it's not mine, it belongs to Dr. Joy Buolamwini, and it's a combination of her work and her research coming out of MIT, and many of you may know Dr. Buolamwini's work through the Netflix documentary called Coded Bias. And in that documentary, there's also Deborah Raji. And Joy Buolamwini, Deborah Raji, and Timna Jabru have worked together looking at the kinds of historic harms in data sets, and particularly looking at case facial recognition. But this is important when we're thinking about the models. And you'll see, just as this presentation progresses, that these are interesting observations. Up to 77.4% of subjects in mainstream data sets are male, up to 94.6% are lighter skinned male. And what these scholars are saying, these approaches, the ways in which we're thinking about using data, and particularly large language models, could be very dysfunctional and dangerous, particularly for people of color. So when we're thinking about the harms, so we know the great things about large language models. We know the amazing things they can do, just from entertainment to healthcare to just about every industry, every discipline, every business model is now being transformed by, let's say, generative AI, and of course, businesses trying to adopt and adapt to these large language models. But these are the harms, and I know we're going to go into more discussion when we get into the panel, that we've seen and we continue to see discrimination because of those data sets. The particular groups are discriminated against because of race, because of gender, because of sexuality, because of ability, because of geography, because of socioeconomic status. Where there's discrimination, we know there can be exclusion, because who we include means we've obviously excluded someone else. And discrimination and bias and exclusion and representation and marginalization, these are many of the harms, and they really speak to questions around fairness. How fair are these data sets that we're using? How transparent, how explainable? What's the level of accountability? And of course, this is a big question around privacy and data leaks. And what we've been seeing with the large language models is the ability to infer private information that we thought no one had. So questions around privacy. And this is a particular concern if you're working in the space of criminal justice, in particular, victims of human trafficking, victims of child sexual abuse, where their data is now becoming public because of these large language models and because of this ability to really infer things that we were not expecting the models to do. Of course, there are questions around misinformation, very critical, disinformation, very important, deception. These are all challenges and harms. And when we think of misinformation and disinformation and deception, we're thinking about questions of democracy here and decision-making and the kind of information that's being made available. And as the United States moves into a very big election in 2024, there's a lot of conversation around generative AI and democracy and voting rights and disinformation and political agendas, really important individual. And it comes back to malicious use. And that's something about this technology that is very critical. What can people do dangerously with this technology? Some of the other harms would be over-reliance and overconfidence in ChatGPT or large language models, this belief that they are sort of like miracle workers or you're speaking to a guru. And this really questions that whole concept of human-machine interaction and the kinds of deception, whether or not people think they're actually speaking to someone, and the model having the ability to make people feel they're actually communicating with something that's real, and creating a lot of challenges when we're thinking about using this technology in, let's say, mental health, or let's say, medical technologies. So thinking about that, questions around manipulation and the fact that we are believing everything we are reading or everything the prompts create, questions around access. Who has the technology? Who has access to the technology? Is it going to widen the digital divide? Of course, questions around the environment and these large language models and what they take out of the environment to actually do the work that they're doing. And of course, questions around large language models and the kinds of intelligence and whether or not it's intelligence or imperialism. And this is something that I also want you to think about when we're talking about the harms, questions around the politics and the power of large language models and AI in general, questions around exploitation. Whose data is being used? It's our data that's continuing to train these models, continuing to fine-tune these models. Questions around monetization. Are we benefiting from that? Who's benefited from that? Who's profited from this technology? The ability to weaponize our data against us. And that's really tied into that concept of malicious use and monopolization and control and imperialism. Just throwing these things out there for us to discuss as we get into the panel. And of course, this is one of the most critical things. When we're thinking about large language models, we're thinking about an emerging technology. And when something is emerging, what's also emerging with it would be its capabilities. And what we have seen with large language models is that we do not know what can emerge and how to prepare and prevent what can emerge with these models. The other thing is we do not know what large language models are truly capable of because they are not explicitly trained to exhibit malicious behavior. So these emerging capabilities are critical because we know what the established risks are. We've experienced those, the bias, discrimination, victimization, profiling, but what are the anticipated risks? And those are the challenges that we are facing, this thinking of what are the risks that we are not thinking about. So when it comes to harm reduction, and getting the best out of this technology and harnessing the things about this technology that's absolutely breathtaking and world and life transforming, it comes back to literacy around data and around AI and upskilling ourselves in real time. Questions around oversight, regulation, and governance. This technology is so new. I mean, you can think about the IEAI Act that was recently passed and put into law. It didn't really deal with generative AI because it is so new. So there is no real-time regulation. There is no real-time governance for a very real-time technology. Most recently in the United States, I know the president brought together several leaders of the top tech companies and asked them to volunteer to do what is ethical, the word volunteer. So we know there is really no enforcement, but we also know there are things we can do to reduce harm. That ethical data pipeline, thinking about how you're collecting, analyzing, visualizing, using that data, participatory design, which is really bringing a diversity, equity, and inclusion approach to the ways in which we are designing to get the fullness of the experience, the fullness of the cultural experiences, the fullness of the geographical experiences, and what I call the JEDI product design decision, implementing an approach that is motivated and moved by justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Just one thing on red teaming, because this is the big thing at the moment with large language models and ways in which we can reduce harm. It's like, how do we attack these models? When we launch the attack against them, how do we analyze what we've seen and how do we audit and fine tune the models? So the red teaming is a risk management approach. It brings also a crisis management approach to thinking about the kinds of harms. It's about attacking, fooling the model, trying to get it to do very malicious things, but the strength of the red teaming approach really is the strength of the creative imagination to see how far you can really push the model. It's about role playing these adversarial acts. It's about looking at the limitations, trying to see what the failures of the models are, and really looking at what could really create negative user experience. So everyone is talking about red teaming. Next month, there is a big event led by Dr. Ruman Chowdhury, and it's really supported by the White House, and all the big tech companies are in it, and they're going to be looking at these large language models, and they're going to be really pushing the envelope to see what these models can do and what they can do that can create or wreak an extraordinary amount of havoc. So the issues with red teaming, again, it's diversity in the individuals who are doing the red teaming, it's linguistic gaps, what the model can do in English, what the model can do in French, what the model can do in Spanish, what the model can do in African, linguistic, approaches. Those are the challenges, because many of the individuals who are doing the red teaming are not bilingual, do not have that multicultural experience. Of course, domain expertise critical. How do we assess the metrics? And of course, we know this technology is an input-output kind of technology, and it may not be sufficient to really truly understand the depths of malicious use. So red teaming efforts do not involve scrutinizing data sets used to train the model. So that's the challenge. It's what's being put into the system. Those large language models could be very, very toxic. Large language models require better curation and redaction when it comes to training those data sets. Two important points to think about. Always remember, when it comes to large language models, to really harness the rewards and minimize the risk, you've got to understand what drives the model. What is the lifeblood of this model? It's the data. Data is never free of human judgment. All data never created equally. There's always this appearance in neutrality when you're working with data, and this presumption of objectivity. There's this memory of intergenerational trauma that's trapped in many of our data sets that continue to replicate bias, discrimination, harm. So I just want you to think always about playing devil's advocate, really pushing the envelope, bringing an extraordinary amount of critical thinking to the ways in which you're using the data sets. And if we want to do generative AI responsibly, then we've got to bring that critical thinking. We've got to play devil's advocate. We've got to really think about an ethical organizational culture. If we're going to build these models, if we're going to use these models, we've got to think about those ethical guardrails that are not there yet, because it is still so very new. And I would say to you, within the last 6 months, I've had conversations in the C-suite about generative AI, but I've had most of my conversations with educators and with students and with high school principals who want to understand how to include and how to integrate this technology in the ways in which we want to reimagine education. A lot of conversation around whether or not students are going to use it to cheat, conversations around whether or not people are going to use it maliciously. But the main thing is we're having the conversations like this one. It's about ethical resilience and understanding those risks and understanding how to reduce those risks, understanding, to really harness the rewards. You've got to understand the risks, you've got to understand the responsibilities, and you've got to understand the long-term impact of this technology on society and those impacts on human rights and civil rights and just the questions around digital rights as well. And if we're going to do all of that, it means that we've got to stay ethically vigilant when we're using technology, because what we want to do is use technology to really transform society in ways in which we could ensure that all communities are thriving and resilient and sustainable. And the kinds of creativity that's being generated by this technology, the creativity has the ability to really transform this world in ways in which we can all be proud of and in which we can all participate. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Renee. Really a lot there that I know we are going to have time to unpack in the conversation. First, we have two comments to that from our other two panelists, and we'll start with Darlington Akoko. He's a global leader in the field of AI. He's the founder and director of AI at Gorda and its subsidiaries Mino Health AI Labs, Argo AI, Runmila AI Institute, and Garda AI Studios. Darlington is involved in AI and tech across several platforms and industries. He's the lead on the topic group on AI for radiology under the United Nations International Telecommunications Union and the World Health Organization's focus group on AI for health. At UN AI for Health, Darlington leads the development of global regulations and standards for AI and radiology. He's a board member and ambassador to West Africa at the AI Expo Africa, the largest business-focused African community in Africa. In addition to this work, he's involved with the MIT Tech Review Global Panel and the World Economic Forum's Global Shapers. He also taught as a lecturer at the Artificial Intelligence at the Academic City College and is the bioinformatics resource person at WET's African Center for Cell Biology and Infectious Pathogens. He has spoken at numerous international conferences, including NeurIPS, MIT's Global Community Bio Summit, and ACP's Heads of State and Government Summit. He also writes reports and essays for Synapsis Magazine and articles for MIT Tech Review. Darlington, please tell us something about your perspective on this topic.
Yeah, so I think Renee did a really good job of highlighting, the ecosystem, the challenges and everything. So this is going to be our attempt not to turn it into a rant, but I am super, super excited about foundation models for a number of reasons. So in the first controversial statement will be that, first of all, I believe we are in the age of AGI, because if you look back at, where the term AGI, artificial general intelligence, came from, it was created as the opposite of narrow AI. So the AI systems we used to develop using machine learning, deep learning, basically you take some specific data on a specific use case and you train a model to do specifically that. And we've done this. I mean, at Mino Health, Caragro AI, we've done this for, a number of medical condition modalities. So you train an AI system that can look at, mammograms and detect breast cancer. That is a specific use case. You build an AI system that can look at drone images to detect diseases in cashew. That is specific. The concept of AGI was the alternative to this, which is that, is it possible to build an AI system that possesses general knowledge and skill sets? And, it seems the AI community is a bit shy to boldly stand by it, but we are in the age of AGI, because if you look at large language models, which we also build, and we've been able to see their capabilities. So the exact example I gave earlier about, using AI to detect diseases. When we went into building multimodal large language models, we now have an AI system, a single AI system that can look at different imaging modalities. So the same AI system can look at X-ray, mammogram, CTs, and then interpret them. It can have conversations with you. But because that same AI system was pre-trained on a number of things, if you ask that AI system questions about politics, if you ask it questions about math, if you ask it questions about, geology, economics, it can give you, valid answers. And depending on the size of the model, like if you're using GPT-4 size model, you can get it to perform on human level across a number of fields, pass a number of bar exams. So yes, we are in the age of AGI. Of course, AI or general intelligence, a continuum. You can have where we currently are, which is a proto AGI. There's still a lot more things to do for our models to be the peak of general intelligence. So hallucinate. This is one of the major issues that need to be solved. They still spout, I was going to use a French word, but they still spout a bunch of wrong stuff. And this is okay if you're asking them to come up with a poem, but if you are asking them to, help write very important documents, this can be quite detrimental if they hallucinate. And then there are a number of things that are being done to solve them. But just acknowledging how powerful our AI systems are brings us to a number of points. One, the possibilities. And then two, the implications. The possibilities are endless. The possibility in the spaces that we work in, like healthcare, with the new, our multimodal large language model, we are basically building an actual medical assistant, some AI system that can truly support medical doctors, radiologists, clinicians, can support them in what they need to do, can give them an alternative view. And we are basically expanding this AI system to cut across all of healthcare. Basically, going forward, that could mean that doctors will not have to retain all of medical knowledge in their head, and they don't have to reference like 1,000 other books or search through repositories. All of it can just be a question away. You can just ask, the chat assistant. You can just ask Mino Chat, what do you think will be the best way to treat this patient, looking at the patient's medical history? And then it would tell you the answer and cite sources. So it would say, based on this research paper that was published in the Lancet and this, the best way to treat someone who has cardiomegaly currently is this and this and this. So those are actual real world benefits to these systems. And in healthcare, in agriculture, in economics, for teaching, for education, the possibilities are endless. We basically can redefine our society, because this is basically the biggest technology we've created. Because prior to this, we've created a lot of tools. And yes, ChatGPT and all of this are still tools, but this is the first time we've actually created a tool that is capable of, the strong things that define us as sapiens, as intelligent beings, and even to the extent that our creation can now create and use tools. So if you look at the history of Homo sapiens, what separated us from, our ancestors and then other species is when we started discovering and using tools. And already you have large language models that can use the internet. They can actually create tools. They can create new functions in Python and then rely on them when they need to. And that makes a huge difference, especially when we want to address some of the challenges they have. Because one challenge they do have is basically we were expecting large language models to retain all the knowledge in the world, which for humans, we don't do that. I don't have to keep every fact about, the capital city of every city in my head. But then if there's time for me if I'm having a conversation, I need to know what is the capital city of Bulgaria, I can just Google it. And so once we give LLMs those abilities, it means a lot of things, but also the implications are there. So Renee highlighted a number of them. There are challenges to society, there's job impacts, there's bias, there's all of these challenges. And so once we are honest about the power of the technology we've built, we can have an honest conversation about the risk that exists, as well as the potential benefits. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darlington. Some really good points, and I'm developing a lot of questions, but I'm sure the audience has them too. But finally, we'll move on to our last panelist, Lavina, and then we'll open it up after that. So Lavina Ramkissoum is a futurist leader standing for the unification of the African tech space. She is a conscious tech proponent with expertise in psychology, technology, and economics, and their applications in AI, blockchain, emerging tech, ethics, and data. A catalyst that has served as a chairperson, director, and founder across multiple industries, sectors, and technologies, aiming to unlock the potential of the African arena. Humanizing technology and actively serving as a growth enabler for tech talent across the globe, often referred to as someone trailblazing through the continent, accompanied with her inspirationally iconic outlook to unlock and be the consciousness for Africa. Her awards include Top 10 Leader Advancing AI, VentureBeat finalist for Responsible AI, Top 100 Women in AI Ethics, African Trailblazer, and Top 100 Leaders and Top 20 Women to look up to in this area. So we're very excited to have you here, Lavina, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic.
Wow, thank you so very much and for having me, and thank you to the other panelists. As they were talking, I actually put down some notes and really spurred some sort of new direction of thinking. A lot of what we've done thus far when it's come to generative AI has been baselined against trust. We've sort of inherently just trusted systems and we cannot function without them. And that's been pretty much our baseline. Having said that, we also know that change is always inevitable. Knowing the fact that change is inevitable, we also know that tech at this point in time, especially AI, has given us the unexpected direction in which it's gone. We also know that there's the unexpected speed at which it actually has been adopted. I don't know about most of you here, but certainly for me, I cannot keep up pace. And, it's becoming harder every single day with the amount of innovation, the amount of knowledge, the amount of, new things that's just happening. But having said that, I think, it's really important for us to kind of go back to basics. And that basics is segmented in, creating that impact that Renee really drove home. And that's something that I kind of really speak to as well. As much as there's always the potential of tech, it's fantastic, it's great, but where exactly can we fit it in terms of shifting humanity? And I think Africa is such a unique position to be able to showcase that in so many different ways. I mean, Darlington gave some really cool examples. You know, and to add to a few of that, we've obviously heard some of the more funnier headlines of recent in the Africa space where, you know, AI boyfriends and, you know, those sort of things are sort of emerging and touching the continent. So, you know, there's a lot of different sort of scenarios that we've got to be playing around with. So, you know, harmful content, what is ethical, what isn't ethical, you know, what is copyright, what isn't, you know, where and when do we stop with data violations? We know that we have a very young continent, and for me in particular, data violations is such a huge important factor, you know, because again, how much are we actually protecting and how much are we preventing? You know, we almost seem to be finding ourselves in an era at this point in time where it's about real-time preventative measures and a mindset that we've created just by having the trust in AI being there, right? But there's still a lot more that can actually be done on top of it. So, you know, there's a lot of ways to actually look at anything. And for me, I'll probably look at three major aspects. One is the perspective of tech. The other is the perspective of human. And the last one being the perspective of social. So, you know, when we have to talk about the perspective of tech itself, we know that the aim is about automation and seamlessness. We know that that in itself leads to a lot of real-time decision-making. We know that it leads to a lot of real-time optimization. Those are the super fantastic benefits of it. But where it becomes, you know, the equating of the balance for me is definitely around, you know, how is that data actually captured? Has it been that inclusive? Is it that fair? Is it that transparent? How is that data then consumed from a usage perspective, from a consumption perspective, and even from a decommissioning perspective, right? So that entirety of that life cycle becomes so key and so important. And you know, when we talk about the perspective of a human, this is pretty much where we talk about our sort of way that we've engaged with it. And that's very much a trust one. We also know that we've become very reliant on it. And we've also subconsciously taken it as our single source of truth, right? And that in itself has a number of different areas that we can unpack. The sort of balancing scale for me on that side is that we know that man is headed towards becoming more machine-like, and machines are becoming or headed towards becoming more man-like. And, you know, somewhere in between that, each other. And the last one is around the perspective of social. The perspective of social is our behavior, our mannerisms, what are our morals, what are our values, and how we actually start redefining that, right? And again, this is baselined against, does AI actually have rights? Is it too early? Is it too late? From a perspective of you know, Africa in itself, I think there's been a lot of work that's been happening on that space itself, from an AU perspective all the way down into countries. We know that in Nigeria at this point in time, they've drafted an AI Act, which will be passed sometime soon. We know that there's a lot that's actually coming, and regulation is trying to keep up. But I think, you know, that human impact, you know, requires every single one of us that plays part of that equation. So, yeah, I mean, access, affordability, and impact is pretty much our new economy.
Thank you so much, Livina, for those thoughts. I now invite Renee and Darlington back so that we can kind of open the floor to our discussion. And please, again, as I said before, feel free to submit questions in the chat and we will relay them on to our speakers. Or you could raise your hand if you would like to just say it verbally. I might start, we had so many great points here and great examples. I want to bring it back to kind of the goals of Brain Africa as well, and say, what can we say about the opportunities, but also the challenges of generative AI, thinking about the global South, African continent in particular. I'm thinking about opportunities for kind of leapfrogging, reaching populations that weren't able to reach before, and how does generative AI, but also problems of data bias, lack of homegrown data and things like that. What does this mean in terms of generative AI in particular? anyone who wants to jump in.
I'll jump in.
Great.
So I will say this, one of the things that I have tried not to do, and I'm going to do it now only because we're having this conversation, is I do not ever use the term global South. Again, this is a term to me that really creates an image that feeds into the bias and the discrimination, particularly geographical bias. And those are the things that we kind of take for granted, those terms and terminologies, and how easily we accept those things to define who we are, or how we think, or how we innovate, or the kinds of resources that we have, or the kinds of concepts that we are generating. When it comes to the African experience, I was in Johannesburg in May, and at the same time, I was reading an African journal that spoke about, is it AI as in artificial intelligence or artificial imperialism? And it was very, very interesting, that piece. And I would say this, one of the challenges with red teaming these new large language models would be those linguistic gaps, would be the lack of that homegrown data, would be the kinds of historical data sets that do not create a true representation and visualization of that experience. So I think this is a great opportunity, also given the work that Darlington has been doing, and of course, given Lavina's leadership. Now, I'm in the US, Lavina is in South Africa. She has been someone ever since I connected with her on LinkedIn that I look to for leadership in the space, versed in just every aspect of AI. Would I say that I'm looking to the South, or would I say she is my North Star, right? So my thing is this: we have got to think about culturally bringing that experience into these models, and we've got to think about that kind of interdisciplinary imagination that I think the African continent has historically been known for, and really getting more and more and more individuals involved in the space. As we were as Darlington was giving his presentation, it just popped up on my phone that 5 or 4 of the big tech companies have just created this new alliance to really drive home questions around AI safety pertaining to large language models in particular. And the fact that all of these companies are in the United States, what does that say? So it's really time, I think, for Africa to really put its resources. I know there's a lot that's been happening in Africa in policy decisions and in laws and legislation and regulation. There's a whole lot of work. And I think across in the United States, the Center for AI and Digital Policy really has highlighted the kinds of policy work that has been happening on the continent. So I would just say it's really time for Africa to take the lead, and that, defining self as global South. I mean, Africa is global, and I just put the full stop after that. That's it for me.
Great points. Thank you. Lavina or Darlington, do you have any other ideas to add to that, or examples maybe?
Yeah, I think, Renee, you did a phenomenal job in terms of just nailing that and, really capturing the essence of what this is really about, right? And how we still inherently have so many different biases, and we may consciously or unconsciously know it. But I think, Caitlin, to your point or to your question in terms of, how can it actually benefit from an African perspective, I think, automation of tasks is something that is a huge sort of consideration. But more so for me is the whole augmentation around human capabilities. And, that's things like coding, that's things like voice to text, that's drafting and helping to summarize a whole lot of different things. And I mean, these may seem like such small little things, but I think for now it's really okay for us to actually be able to adopt it in a manner and a fashion that is actually then affordable and accessible to anyone and everyone. So, it's one of the easiest ways of barriers of entry with any technology. But having said that, at the same time, just on a global scale, we've seen that the adoption of AI actually has had such a small sort of requirement or a push we all almost instantaneously, when something comes out, we just try it. There's not even a question or a time frame or a room for actual adoption to happen anymore. And therefore, we're seeing crazy numbers like, within 5 days, a company is going to 100 million, sort of downloads or users. And it's purely because of that we're kind of starting to see those things happen. But again, if we create the foundational blocks and we put that into place, I think for us, those may obviously then spur a lot more to happen.
Great, thanks. Darlington, you have anything to add to that?
Sure, I think Renee and Lavina covered, the key points, right? So the only thing I'll add to it is that, yes, there's the aspect where there isn't enough representation within the data that these models are trained on from, the African continent. GPT-4 speaks or can handle some African languages, like popular ones like Swahili. I've spoken to friends that have tried it in some of the local languages in Ghana. At least they have some reference point like, Kofi and random stuff like that. But for me, I would say the imperative is not on OpenAI to then build GPT-5 with representation of data from Africa. The imperative is on Africans to build their alternatives of GPT, build their own large language models, build their own generative AI image gen and stuff like that. That has that representation. I mean, building these models, like from my experience, is tedious, is expensive. You need a lot of compute power and stuff like that. So it's kind of, these companies are already spending tens of millions. So I wouldn't say it's their obligation to resolve those companies. The obligation of, let's say, companies like Mino Health AI Labs to build the alternatives that we then do a good job of getting the data to represent. So for example, we have a number of medical facilities we are working on. We collect data from them. We anonymize this data, and then we use to train this large language models, generative AI models. So yeah, that's the bit I would say we need to do more, across policy, but also the development of the solutions.
Yeah, that gets exactly to the next thing I wanted to say. And I think, we're talking about, it's fine to talk about AI generally, and then, coming to generative AI, the big difference with it is really the scale, right? So the scale in terms of the use on the user side, and what does that mean for the digital divide? And I think Darlington, had a good example about languages and who's actually able to access it and use it, and how will that kind of increase gaps. But also on the development side, there's only a few companies in the world that can handle processing these generative AI models, right? In terms of cost, in terms of, and not even talking about the water and energy use that it takes to run these models. So what does that also mean for kind of this digital divide, that now there's just essentially a few actors that can even kind of be a part of the development?
Well, it speaks to the power and the politics around the power. And when you think about the US, as I just said, the 5 biggest companies in the world who could handle and who's creating are all in the United States. And the fact that the president of the United States brought them together for them to volunteer, to do generative AI ethically, to volunteer. And now they have also come up with their own group, their own alliance, to come up with the best practices or the standards when it comes to responsible AI and AI safety. It really speaks to questions around power. And I would just say in the United States context, when we think about the digital divide, and we think about rural America, and we think about the millions of people who do not have internet access, and when you think about this technology and how it's being used, let's say in just every industry, every discipline, if we just want to look at education and what this can do for really reimagining education, but then when you think about the access and who has access to this technology and who's able to use this technology, then you're thinking whether or not it could also widen the digital divide. But we know it can do brilliant things when it comes to innovating the education system, when it comes to the ways in which we think about creativity, when it comes to the ways in which our students who previously had challenges, students with disabilities, students not speaking a particular language in a particular country where they're being educated, and the ease in which this technology can now assist you in your educational goals and your educational advancement. But then when you think about the other people who don't have access, so it's questions around power, questions around profit, questions around monetization, and who holds the power? Who holds that power? And it comes back to data. And the fact that the data that's being used to create these models is everything that we have all shared and everything that we have all, used and put into that pool on the internet. But this is the reality in which we exist. This is the technology of now. I always say AI, and of course, generative AI is a language. We've got to learn it because more and more we are going to be using technology to do some absolutely amazing things, but we've got to think about those risks, those harms, those social costs. And of course, we've got to think about what kinds of legacies are we creating with this technology when we think about the future of society and the futures that we are using these technologies to design.
Yeah, great. Lavina or Darlington, do you have any examples from Ghana or South Africa or beyond where we kind of see or have found ways, either we see these digital divides play out or have found ways to deal with them, at least in slight ways, or maybe ideas to deal with them, both on the user side and on the developer side, these kind of divides we're talking about?
Yeah, so Darlington, do you want to go first?
Oh, okay, I don't mind. That's fine. Yeah, so I mean, from the user side, a good use case to look at will be agriculture. It's difficult to scale, solutions in agriculture in Ghana, which is also the case in a number of African countries. And, we work in that space. And the tricky part of it is that when most of our food is produced by small-scale farmers, but then small-scale farmers do not have access to, the latest of technologies. Yeah, some of them have, the low-cost Android phones, but most of them don't. Then also the digital literacy is also another component of it. But then if you want to provide solutions for agriculture, you develop AI solutions. If you take it to the medium to large-scale farmers, there are medium to large-scale farmers, but they are not a lot, and they don't produce substantially what we depend on. And so if you want to have impact, you need to work with small-scale farmers. But if you develop a lot of digital solutions for small-scale farmers, there's a gap in them being able to use it. So those are some of the challenges we run into. So for us like this, we would work with medium to large-scale farmers, we'll work with plant breeders, but with small-scale farmers, the solution we currently go with is that we have the extension officers be their interface between the farmers. So the farmers are the beneficiaries, but they are not the users. But it would have been easier in a world where, this did not exist, and then the farmers can really tap into this AI solutions and stuff like that to improve their farming. So that exists. And, sometimes I'm reminded that we live in a bubble, because in my everyday world, everyone talks about large language models, generative AI, everyone knows ChatGPT, but then, you kind of get brought back to reality when you run into the average person on the street or something and they have no idea what you are talking about. So clearly there's some divide even right here in Ghana as far as, and then like what Renee already mentions when it comes to being able to build this AI systems, it's really expensive. I mean, currently for us, we are focused on doing further pre-training and fine-tuning of these models, and that in itself is costing like a whole lot of money. If you want to build all the way from ground up, that is now you spending millions, tens of millions even. But yes, I think it's important that we have a number of actors from Africa that are also able to do this.
Yeah, so I'll just piggyback off a few different examples. So let's start with one that probably doesn't work so well from a South Africa perspective, and that's surveillance. So we've had, or we currently have cameras that monitor everything that we do, from, you know, driving past on a road. It captures your license plate. It then holds your information. It then gets distributed. And to date, you know, that is completely against any data privacy and any sort of, you know, access that you may want to have of your own information. And, you know, although we have somewhat of a framework in place, we have mandated, obviously, you know, data privacy as a policy. We have, you know, people that take care of that, but there's not a lot of enforcement that then happens from that perspective. So, you know, there's that reality of that divide that's already happening on the ground. So as much as regulation is there isn't much enforcement that then is backing that up. So that's one example. You know, when we talk about the sort of broader scale and the cool, nice examples that are happening on the continent, I guess, or even just the potential of generative AI as a whole, you know, let's take, for example, you know, a telco industry, right? So, you know, it has the ability to kind of bridge the divide, that digital divide, as well as it has the potential to exponentially, you know, grow that divide. You know, and that in itself is quite a unique thing. And I think within a Africa space where people are still not connected to the internet, you know, a simple thing like that becomes such a key sort of block that we need to fill. Another one, I guess, for me is around like banking. Banking is something where we've seen, you know, a lot of increase in usage around generative AI, where it can literally, you know, auto-generate, you know, letters, auto-generate cancellations, auto-generate savings, auto-generate, you know, a whole lot of different things for you. And that makes life a lot simpler, right? So what we're seeing to date is it's taking complexities that exist and it's trying to really simplify it into our day-to-day lives and how we engage with it. Yeah, so those are some of the sort of real time examples that are existing that are probably helping to, yeah, expand that digital.
Great. Okay, I've been dominating the conversation with my own questions, but my chat box is filling up, so I'm going to move on to a few more, sticking with kind of examples, but moving back to data. One person is asking if you could give maybe a quick example of a measure, plan, or project that exists to create data sets with more dark-skinned people, minorities, women, African relevant data. If any or all of you have kind of a quick example of an effort that's been made in that sense.
Well, I will say this. I don't have a specific data set to send you to, but I know that people have been doing some work within that, trying to create that. Whether or not they will ever be able to create the kind of data set that's required that could compete with 2 decades or more of what's been scraped off of the internet probably is not going to happen. But I think definitely the awareness and the understanding of the kinds of traumas and troubles associated with historical data sets, it's what is required of all of us to understanding those kinds of consequences with us not being diligent, with us not bringing that kind of heightened consciousness to the ways in which we do data science and the ways in which we use data science to build these artificial intelligence or generative AI models. So it's really about the knowledge and the awareness and bringing that through a justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion perspective. And it's also about just bringing that kind of domain experience when you approach these models, and also for people who are using the technology to understand this is not a guru, this is not an oracle, this is not some miracle working technology. This is a model that is not a knowledge model, it is a language model. And it's important for us just to have the understanding. But I do know, if you want to find out more about what's being created with these data sets, I would suggest or recommend that you follow the work of Dr. Joy Bulamwini, Dr. Timnit Jibru, Deborah Raji, and a few other scholars in that space who have been focusing particularly on making our data sets more diverse.
Yeah, I was actually going to sort of piggyback and mention Timid as well, and the DARE Institute. I think they're doing some phenomenal work on that front. Also, I think we've seen on the continent a lot of rise in terms of synthetic data. So people are actually, because it's so underrepresented, whether it's the health data being largely unrepresented or the creative industry areas that are being, relatively underrepresented, people are actually turning to more and more synthetic data consumption and data, creation. But again, I think there's an opportunity right there in itself for us as Africa, as a continent, to actually create something as a pool where we can all leverage off from.
Yeah, so I'll highlight some of the data sets that we've worked on. So in agriculture, for example, we put together a consortium across Ghana, Uganda, Tanzania, and Namibia, and then created the largest disease and pest data set in the world, which has, over 250,000 images cutting across multiple crops, multiple diseases, and it's for object detection. So prior to ours, the largest data set was from US university, and then they had about 100,000. It was primarily for image classification, not even object detection. So yeah, we're able to put together that consortium and build data sets. In Ghana, for example, to collect that data, we worked across all 16 regions of the country. So we made sure it was highly representative of, the different varieties of crops, environments across. And then we made sure we had West, East, and then Southern Africa within that data set. And the organization that supported that was Lacuna Fund. Lacuna Fund has been doing an amazing job in the last couple of years of supporting the creation of African data sets across healthcare, agriculture, language. Currently, they have a call for climate, which is wrapping up. I'm on the technical advisory panel for that. And, there are going to be a lot of data sets that are going to even be created around climate change, climate science across the continent and stuff like that. So over the years, Lacuna Fund has supported probably 100, 200 different data sets across different domains. And, you have language data set for languages that are usually not featured in, these models that are built in other parts of the world. But if you want data on, Ga, Ewetri, Yoruba and stuff like this, because of Lacuna funded project now have those data sets, they're available online. You can get access to them and use. So I think we've come a long way as far as creating these data sets. Yeah.
Great, thank you guys for those examples. I have two questions I see here that are kind of related, at least in my mind. So looking at the fast pace which generative AI is moving, wouldn't large-scale adoption of this technology result in loss of jobs, especially in Africa? And relatedly, as AI becomes more prevalent, what new skills or education will be necessary for the future workforce? So for me, I see those as kind of intertwined.
Well, since they're Africa specific, I'll defer to Lavina and Darlington.
Yeah, thanks for that, Renee. Yeah, so interesting question, absolutely. So job loss, as is expected or as has been ingrained in our fears, the whole job loss concept is there. But I think it's more about how do we remodel ourselves, how do we reskill ourselves, and where do we find that next sort of piece that we need to pivot to. So for example, maybe 20 years ago, content influencers didn't exist, but now they do. So similarly, in the AI space, I see things like an AI psychologist actually coming about. There's different areas within that space itself, whether it's on the nanotech side, whether it's a merger between like quantum computing and AI, whether it's So, I mean, there's a lot of different sort of future-based jobs that will exist. So those are just some that come to mind.
Great. Darlington, any thoughts?
I think so. I already, made my early statement that I think we're in the age of AGI. And I think currently these generative AI models are better than, humans, or at least let's say an average human at certain things, but very, very much terrible at other things. It's only a matter of time that, they exceed us across all metrics, because their ability to scale and improve performance based on data. Like, even if you track the changes that happen, ChatGPT went live November 2022, early 2023, we had GPT-4, and, on some metrics, the performances doubled between 3.5 to 4. And so, and it was trained on just a fragment of, usually we make the statement that these models are trained on the internet, but they're actually not trained on the internet. They are trained on 0.001 of the internet. There's petabyte of data still left on the internet, and there's nothing stopping apart from maybe cost of going higher. So anyway, my point is that it's inevitable that these AI models can do what human experts can do. The only question is whether organizations and entities in Africa would leverage it fully. And I think those who are in the digital space, they might be disrupted even quicker than those who are in spaces that do not have a lot of digital, infrastructure, because then ChatGPT does not help in any way if there's no digital infrastructure. But even coders who, for years thought they were special are probably the ones that would have a lot of disruption. Like today, what takes a team of 20 developers to do if they are really leveraging Copilot, Replit, and then, just even ChatGPT to help with code and everything, you can do it with a team of 3 or 5 people. And that is today. So it's bound to happen. And as we digitize different sectors, it will happen more and more. So I do think we need to have an honest conversation about job disruption. There have been ideas that have been proposed for years, like universal basic income. I think in Kenya, there was an experiment run on this some years ago, and it shows that it works. We will need stuff like that. But more importantly, if we do not have, because this is the new economy, then basically all the money is every sector. AI, generative AI solutions we build for every sector. And so if all of these solutions are coming from outside the continent, our economy is definitely going to experience some hits.
Thanks, Darlington. I think you broke up a little there, but I think we got most of it. And I have a few other questions. One is someone asking that striking a balance between innovation and ethical boundaries is key to ensuring the positive impact of generative AI on humanity. And I think a lot of these points were highlighted in your presentations, but maybe we can kind of just highlight a few points here, because the question is, in what ways might AI impact personal privacy and data security? How can we, and maybe specifically generative AI, and how can we strike a balance? How can we better strike a balance between kind of the benefits and the protecting of individual and even human rights, I would say?
Sure. I think at the moment, one of the most daring harms with the generative AI is the ability to infer what is not there. And what we have seen is that when it comes to privacy, it had the ability to reveal people's identities, their addresses, their phone numbers. And I think many of the developers of the technology still have not figured out why the technology has that ability to almost, fill in the blanks. This we have seen in particular in the US has created an extraordinary amount of re-traumatization and re-victimization for individuals who have been victims of online sexual abuse, or who have been victims of sextortion, or who've been victims of just very malicious types of behavior online. There are victims of online sexual abuse who said victimizers got their addresses and their phone numbers, which were inferred using ChatGPT, and was able to send them things like sex toys in the mail. Very, very troubling scenarios, and that in particular got the attention of law enforcement. So when we think about privacy, when we think about questions around safety, questions around security, questions around cybersecurity, those are some of the concerns that are being red teamed and will continue to be red teamed to find out, why does the technology do this? What creates these kinds of troubles for the technology? When it comes to ethics and innovation, I always say it would be the perfect marriage, and it can live in the same house. We've just got to bring that understanding, is that for us to do it ethically and responsibly, and for us to do responsible AI and trustworthy AI, we've got to understand the risks. We cannot shy away from the risk. And where there are risks, there are responsibilities, and it is our responsibility to be aware, to be informed, and to know how to do data science and AI and generative AI responsibly. The other thing that we need to think about is public confidence and public trust. And for the public to trust this technology, for the technology to really get the kind of legitimacy it is trying to achieve, it has got to ensure that public feedback is a part of the technology, part of that human in the loop. It has got to understand that public knowledge and public information and literacy is required for people to understand the technology. When it comes to human rights and civil rights, one of the big questions around democracy, and how does this technology, given its penchant for deception and hallucinations, and the ability for malicious users to use this technology to deceive, to spread disinformation, and how all of these types of manipulation, when it comes to media and content manipulation using the internet, have the ability to undermine democracy, undermine due process, undermine our ability to make decisions based on the information that we are getting. For most of the ethicists in this space, and particularly ethicists and activists in the AI and generative AI space living in the United States, the big test is going to be the 2024 election, where people are waiting to see how this technology is being used, or is used, either maliciously, either in positive ways, and how bad actors may use this technology when it comes to deep fakes, when it comes to just generating malicious text in real time. Spreading things in ways for us to be deceived, believing it's coming from reputable sources. So just so many challenges there when it comes to the ethics. I know there has been this push that there needs to be some sort of watermark or some sort of image or some sort of disclaimer, so people could know that, one, you're chatting with something that's not real, two, the content that you're reading has been provided by or created or curated by ChatGPT, or just building that ethical awareness. So that's when I speak about ethical resilience. That's the kind of education that we need, because one of the things we've realized with data and AI and now generative AI is that we have got to continuously be ethically vigilant when we're using these technologies.
Thank you. We have so many questions, and I think one just came in that I think will really add to that, and maybe Lavina and Darlington can come in on that. In the event of a generative AI creating content that inadvertently infringes on copyright laws, produces harmful or misleading, disinformation, all these things Renee was just talking about, where does the liability fall? Does it lie with AI developers, users who deploy AI? Do we need new ways to think about this idea of the unique challenges that generative AI presents to liability?
Jump in here and say that's what's being revealed at this moment. Questions around copyright. Artists now are suing tech companies when it comes to intellectual property, when it comes to copyright. We know one of the big questions when it comes to AI has always been proprietary rights of the coders, of the developers, of the people developing this technology. And they have been so resistant for us to get into that black box, particularly from a criminal justice perspective, because when we think about the implications of AI on the criminal justice system, or AI on a defendant, or using a risk assessment tool in the criminal justice system that says that someone should be denied parole or denied bail. We've had cases now in the US where defendants have taken to task these black boxes because one of the basic tenets of the criminal justice system is the ability to face your accuser, and if that accuser is an algorithm, that is your right. What generative AI is doing now is sort of flipping the script, because these same developers who denied us and who continue to deny us access to the black box, now you have creatives who are saying, you are taking our life's work, you are taking our creativity, you are taking our knowledge, and you are using this to create the kinds of outputs that you are making money on. In the United States, of course, we're having a big discussion at the moment with generative AI in Hollywood, and the big movie companies wanting to clone many of the actors, the work of many of the creatives in that space, and how AI is impacting the future of film, the future of movies, the future of entertainment. So these are big questions. They are not yet resolved because, as I said, generative AI is so new. There really isn't any regulation. There really isn't any major robust kind of or rigorous kind of governance structures. I think at the moment we are learning. We're kind of in this sort of gold rush era where everyone is trying to get a little bit of this resource and do something with it. But we're also in a time and a space where I think the ethics community is really trying to think about ways in which to address many of those concerns, even open source and using that approach is also generating challenges. Recently, I think it was Meta that released a new tool, right? And the question around that was that what Meta recently released carries with it the bias and the discrimination, because the company was saying, what we can do is put this out into the public, as most of these companies have said, and let's see how people use them. And that's the only way we're going to see the kinds of risks there as well. But just saying, adding to that is coming back to that question of copyright and law, and what this is actually doing. Generative AI is really now expanding the imagination of privacy law, the imagination of law in general. And I would, for full transparency, even admit to you, just a few days ago, I got myself a book off of Amazon that looks at the impact of AI and law specifically since the advent of ChatGPT. So it's a lot of real-time learning. This is what is most important for me. And that upskilling of self comes with really building your own knowledge capacity to understand the ways in which this technology is just reinventing every discipline. So although it can do major things in the legal and the criminal justice system, it's doing some major things with copyright and intellectual property and proprietary rights that have got to be resolved as well, because I think everyone needs to be compensated, in particularly if your work is being used to generate new works that people are profiting off as well.
And a school of thought that I kind of came across as well was one around AI actually being incorporated. So, from a human behavior perspective, I guess we always say, Nikki not it, I'm not it. I don't want to take the blame or the fall for any of this. They're starting to kind of really look towards having AI become its own entity and have its own rights and have its own leg to stand on in terms of, the sort of misuse and the copyright issues that may exist in the future. Which I think is an interesting sort of perspective, but may not necessarily be the full answer in terms of how we deal with it. Because, whenever we look at the sort of triangle, it's always, government or regulation, and we have the private entity, and you have you as yourself as a digital citizen. And, somewhere along those three, you kind of got to always have the balance.
And I would just add to that, a very good space if someone is really interested in looking at responsibility and liability would be the deployment of AI and generative AI in the space of finance and financial crimes. and who really is to blame if the model itself does something that is seen to be against the law. So there's been a lot of conversation in the space of financial crimes and fraud that really may dictate the pace of how the law looks at questions around liability and those types of risks.
Yeah, I'm sure those examples are only going to keep expanding as it's used more and more. I'm going to try to combine a couple of questions because we're not going to get to all of them because we're going to have to wrap up soon. But there are two questions here that are kind of around the education and awareness topic that I think several of you touched on. So how do we make the important AI and generative AI conversation more mainstream? And another participant from Cape Verde said, they're noticing a lot of marginalization around the discussion of these issues in Africa in particular. So how do we kind of bring awareness more to the public about the issues, challenges, and opportunities of generative AI, and also bring kind of Africa out of the marginalization of this conversation at a global level?
So I'll probably,
go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, for me, I've kind of always, vouched for the fact that it always starts a conversation over a dinner table. The more conversations that we have, whether it's a teenager that educating a family about, the different types of technologies that exist, or whether or not it is, a parent that has come home because they've started working in that particular area that has found some new research that's really cool and exciting. Or maybe it's a grandmom that kind of listened to the radio and heard a news headline, right? I mean, all of these things, it's all about open communication. And I think, grounded in the fact that, Africa is baselined on community, and this is how we function, and this is how we've always grown. I think that's something that we need to really, really leverage, as much as we want to say, yes, it's the likes of, governments and regulations, as much as it's the likes of corporates that need to educate us. It is that, but I also believe that, we in ourselves, what we can control, we should actually then utilize quite a lot.
Just to add to that, and Lubina, of course, that was excellent as usual. If anyone is interested really in AI and generative AI in the education space, there is a nonprofit out of the US called the AI Education Project that has really been doing some extraordinary work when it comes to generative AI. And I will try to share that. And Lavina raised an excellent point about teenagers. And I think what I have been noticing in the generative AI space is that teenagers and students are using this technology much more than most of us. And they are coming to grip with the ways in which to use it innovatively and the ways in which to stretch its imagination and the kinds of challenges. And I think from an education perspective, I think could only speak for the US, where you find most of academia, most of the educational institutions are trying to come up with some kind of policy. Of course, there is no standard policy, so the policy is just happening in different spaces and different places. But I think at the moment in education, they're trying their best using, of course, guidance from the White House to come up with some sort of overarching governing policy and how to innovate with the technology, how not to remove the creative direction of our educators and our educational administrators, but how to really incorporate and to innovate and to collaborate and to bring this kind of interdisciplinary thinking that's required to harness the power of generative AI and models. So I think our young people are leading the way, and I think we may need to defer to them when it comes to really getting the best out of this technology, because the teenagers and the high school students and the college students, university students are the ones who are really interfacing with this technology in real time.
Thanks so much. Darlington, any quick point before we move on to my wrap-up question?
Yeah, so I think also making sure we have this within the curriculum within our institution. So for example, Responsible AI Lab, we created a curriculum for AI at the bachelor's, master's level, and also I believe also at the PhD level. So factoring in generative AI in those components are important to make sure, we are training people towards this new age that we are in. But also, even outside of computer science engineering, just making sure that we have this concept of augmented intelligence where different people are looking at their sector and seeing how can generative AI be used, and then inculcating that within the teaching process where we don't so much fight it, but we see how we can leverage it to prepare them for that new age. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So I had a question from earlier on, but I thought it was a nice wrap-up question. So well, I'm going to give each of you kind of your last statement kind of based on this question. Are there any specific acts from the ethical AI community for those of us working on the front lines of tech, software engineers, product managers, designers, et cetera? Are there ways which we can be more vigilant regarding the adoption of AI, whether it's in products, companies who build the products we help build at work? So you could just give kind of like one kind of last statement or opinion on what can our AI ethics community at the front lines kind of be most vigilant about or do in their place of work? Let's start with Renee.
I would say this, bring a heightened level of consciousness to what you're doing. Understand that what you're doing is just not happening in time and space. It comes with an understanding of the history, particularly, I would say this, when it comes to AI, when it comes to generative AI, when it comes to all these new and emerging technologies, it goes back to one thing, the data sets. So if you bring that kind of consciousness to really interrogating and investigating and understanding data, and as I would close, I would always say this, just remember that data has a memory that is much deeper than its computational memory. It has a historic, it has a political, it has a cultural memory. And if you were really to understand that and bring that kind of consciousness to your work, then you would understand the long-term implications of data in society. And what you will do is, I think you would design with the kind of intentionality that creates really a justice-informed and a trauma-informed, diverse, equitable, and inclusive design that will really lift up communities and really build society.
Thank you so much, Renee. Darlington, last thoughts?
Yeah, so I would say I recommend machine learning auditing as a good way to technically verify if your AI systems or your product are actually not having these issues as far as bias, and they can be trustworthy. So taking a technical approach to verifying that, there's a lot of ideas in this space. I mean, we did some work called precision evaluation, where if you're testing an AI system, instead of saying my AI system scored 80%, the question is 80% on who exactly. So with precision evaluation, you can actually break down the performance of your model across different demographics, from a geographic point, gender, age group, and then you get to see a picture where your AI system on average might be 80%, but then you might see that it's 90% male, but then the performance drops to 30% female. If that's the case, then currently there's an issue there, either in the data or in your modeling, so you need to fix it. So taking a machine learning framework, machine learning auditing framework towards rigorously testing your AI system to make sure they are of ethical standing is the way to go.
Thank you. And finally, Lavina.
Yeah, I would probably say, it's really centered around being more human. So, that particular instance for me is about, not only just, being aware, but it is understanding the full dynamic. So for example, it is you as the creator of this particular software, put on the hat of you being the actual user of that software. Understand its impact not only to you, understand its impact to you, understand its impact to your family, understand its impact to the wider community, understand its impact to the wider continent, and even the globe. So, it's almost more just something where you have to allow yourself to be part of that narrative, and you get to understand that you get to drive that outcome as well, taking into account things like fairness and transparency and security and safety and all the nice, lovely things that go with it.
Thank you all so much. I think from the questions we still didn't even get to in our audience, there's a lot more to talk about on this topic, and I know you'll all continue to stay engaged with it. So thank you so much for spending your time with us here today. I'm going to pass it back over to Jerry to close out the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caitlin, for an excellent moderation. I mean, when we were starting the session, I did indicate that we have assembled the best of the best, and it promised to be an exciting time. Having sat through an hour and a half, I really don't want to leave this space because I have learned so much, and I actually want to learn some more. We want to say a very big thank you to you, Renee, for waking up that early to spend time with us. I mean, it's been awesome. Thank you, Lavina, for my brother, Kweku Darlington. Great stuff. And I want to say a big thank you. Behind the scenes, others have been working so hard to ensure that this particular workshop is a success. I can mention Lord, who is working very hard behind the scenes. Lord, if you could put up your video so we can say a very big thank you to you as well. But having said that, yeah, that is Lord. Yeah, Lord, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for all the hard work. Having said that, this workshop has been done collaboratively between the Responsible Artificial Intelligence Network Africa and then the Responsible Artificial Intelligence Lab. I want us to continue to watch this space. I am sure that RAIN will organize another workshop before the end of the year. This particular workshop was recorded, and on the RAIN website, it will be shared so that those who couldn't even join us live will have the opportunity of learning more. I mean, the learning does not end. As Renee and the others said, I mean, you watch this space in the next few hours, a lot more are going to come up, and there is more that we need to learn. And so once again, we say a very big thank you for being part of this.